Lucia is a 90-year-old grandmother living in a quiet little village. Every morning, she sits on the porch of her wooden house, accompanied by a cup of warm tea and the gentle sound of birds singing. She appears serene, wearing a cloth head covering neatly wrapped around her head. Her life moves slowly, but meaningfully, as if time flows differently around her. Lucia's home is simple, yet full of warmth. Its wooden walls are weathered by time, but inside lies a treasure of priceless memories. From old paintings to neatly hung black and white photos, everything stands as a silent witness to her long journey through life. Although her steps are no longer strong, Lucia continues her days with spirit. She enjoys caring for her small potted flowers, watering them gently while humming old songs. Every smile radiates warmth, and every movement carries sincerity. Little Lucia grew up in the same village where she now lives. The 1940s were a time of simplicity, yet filled with warmth. She often played jump rope or hide and seek with other children in the grassy field near the old church. Their laughter echoed, breaking the quiet of the afternoon. She was known as a curious little girl. Often, she would sit near the wooden fence, watching bees move between flowers, or gazing at the slow-moving clouds above. The world felt vast and full of wonder to her. Her mother often called Lucia to help in the kitchen, but the little girl would often arrive with muddy hands from playing in the dirt. Still, her mother never scolded her. In fact, those moments created a bond that felt close and warm. Lucia had a wooden doll made by her father. Though simple, it was her most treasured possession. She named it Anna and took it everywhere, even to bed. Every afternoon, Lucia and her friends walked along a small river, looking for unique stones or playing in the water. Their shoes got wet, their clothes dirty, but nothing was more joyful than those little adventures. Those years were golden in Lucia's life. Days filled with freedom, laughter, and togetherness. She didn't know that someday, everything would change, but for now, the world was a beautiful place. Lucia entered her teenage years, just as the shadow of war began to blanket her village. Distant explosions, the worried whispers of adults, and the presence of foreign soldiers on the streets became part of daily life. Her father, once cheerful, now often sat in silence. He stared blankly out the window from his wooden chair, as if waiting for something that never came. Lucia felt the weight of it, even if she didn't fully understand. One night, a loud explosion sounded closer than ever. Lucia and her family ran to the cramped basement, huddling together in the dark, waiting for the shaking to stop. It was the first night Lucia felt truly afraid. School closed. Lucia lost the routine she loved. Books were shelved, uniforms folded away. She began helping her mother bake bread and sew clothes, small things that kept the days moving forward. One by one, her friends disappeared. Some fled, others never returned. The field where they used to play was now empty and silent, with only tall grass and the sound of wind remaining. Lucia began writing in a secret diary. She poured out her fears, dreams, and questions she couldn't speak aloud. That little book became the only place where she felt truly free. One day Lucia saw a small bird flying across the smoke-filled sky. She watched it for a long time, feeling that a small hope could still survive, even when everything seemed to fall apart. At night, Lucia often dreamed of life before the war, laughter, school, and her father smiling again. But when she woke, only silence and gray skies remained. Lucia learned strength from her mother. Though her mother's body grew thin and her voice softer, the fire in her spirit burned on. Lucia mirrored that, becoming a small light in the darkness. War changed Lucia, but it didn't extinguish her spirit. She grew in silence, like a wildflower among ruins. And even as the world crumbled, she held on to the belief that tomorrow would come. Lucia grew into a graceful young woman. Her face radiated a soft smile that could soothe anyone. In that small village, she became a symbol of hope and serenity. Then came a young man from the city, handsome, brave, and full of curiosity. His name was Armand. He came to the village as a young teacher, and from the very first meeting, Lucia's world shifted. They often met at the village library. Among piles of old books and the scent of aged paper, conversation after conversation bloomed into feelings. But their love wasn't without obstacles. Armand came from a wealthy city family, while Lucia was just a farmer's daughter. The difference in status became a tall wall, hard to climb. Their nights were filled with secret letters and brief meetings in fields of wildflowers. Every second together felt like stealing time from the world. But the pressure from Armand's family grew stronger. He was forced to choose love or family honor. In the end, Armand left without saying goodbye, leaving only one final letter. Lucia was heartbroken, but she didn't drown in sorrow. She chose strength. She kept teaching village children, planting smiles on their faces even though her heart was broken. Lucia's true love may have only come once, but its memory lived on in her gentle smile and deep gaze. Years passed, people came and went, but Lucia remained. She was part of the land, part of the village's story. Love doesn't always have to be possessed. Sometimes it's enough to be remembered, and Lucia knew that better than anyone. The year was harsh, colder than usual. Lucia, now in her 20s, faced the unthinkable. Both her parents fell ill and passed away just weeks apart. She didn't even have time to grieve. The village was plagued by sickness, and many children had lost their parents. Instead of breaking, Lucia chose to rise. She started caring for the orphans around her, offering food, warmth, and stories. They called her Mother of Light for bringing hope in the darkest times. Her house became a small haven, worn down but filled with laughter. Lucia survived by sewing discarded fabrics into clothes and quilts. Every stitch carried love. One winter, a child named Sira became seriously ill. Lucia spent every night by her side. Lucia had no medicine, no money, only prayers, warmth, and stories to keep Sira going. Just when all hope seemed lost, Sira opened her eyes and whispered, "I had a dream about your smile." The story of Sira spread through the village, and so did admiration for Lucia. Lucia didn't seek recognition, but the village elders came to her, offering her land to build a proper home for the children. With her bare hands and help from the villagers, Lucia built a modest but strong shelter. That shelter became a home, a school, and a sanctuary. Children learned not only to read, but also to love and survive. Some of those children would later become doctors, teachers, and even leaders. But they all remembered one name, Lucia. Lucia never married. Her life was given to others. And for her, that was enough. In her twilight years, Lucia lives in a comforting silence. Her small house on the outskirts of town is always wrapped in warm afternoon light, and the scent of wood burning in the fireplace. Lucia never truly feels alone. Everything around her seems to hold silent conversations, an old painting, an antique clock, and a shelf full of worn books. Her neighbors greet her warmly when she visits the small market down the street. Though her steps are slower now, Lucia still walks with grace. She often sits on a park bench, feeding small birds. Her face is calm, full of tenderness, and the wisdom of decades lived. Lucia fills her days with small activities, knitting, watering flowers, writing letters to old friends. She's no longer in a rush. Life moves at its own gentle rhythm. Though many of her peers are gone, Lucia hasn't lost her spirit. She believes that as long as she can share smiles and kindness, life still holds meaning. She keeps an old photo album. Sometimes she opens a page, looking at the faces of those who've gone, and smiles not out of sorrow, but gratitude. Lucia enjoys sitting by the fireplace as night falls. The flickering firelight dances on her face, reviving memories as if time were rewinding in her mind. Young people sometimes visit to hear her stories. They love Lucia's gentle voice as she speaks of love, struggle, and hope. At 85, Lucia still plants flowers in her garden. She believes that as long as something grows, it's never too late in life. Lucia never had children, nor a life partner. Yet, she was a second mother to many children in her village. She taught them to read, wiped away tears, and welcomed anyone who needed shelter. Many young people said, "If not for Lucia, I would never have gone to school." Lucia set aside small amounts of money to buy books, uniforms, and even pay tuition for those in need. She wasn't one to speak in front of crowds, but her presence spoke volumes. She listened more than she talked, offered hugs when needed, and kept others' secrets faithfully. Lucia was known as the guardian of values. She instilled honesty, hard work, and compassion as the pillars of life. Children raised around her carried these values wherever they went. In her old age, many of those once small children returned to visit. They brought their own children, introducing Lucia as the reason they stand tall today. Though she never held titles or degrees, Lucia was a teacher of life. She gave lessons without chalkboards, only with love and example. There are no biographies or grand documentaries about her, but Lucia's story lives on in many hearts. She was a quiet legend in the village she loved. She never asked for anything in return. Lucia believed that a meaningful life is one that gives. Lucia may have aged, her steps slower than before, but her influence flowed like a river, quiet, yet deep. Perhaps Lucia's name won't be carved into stone, but in the hearts of those who knew her, she is a true hero. Lucia sat in her old rattan chair, gazing out the window. The evening slowly swallowed the sky, and the world felt at peace. In the silence, she reflected on her life not with regret, but with deep gratitude. Old photographs on a small table captured fragments of her life, children she cared for, smiles she shared, and places she once visited. None of them were bound to her by blood, but each belonged to her heart. Now Lucia was no longer strong in body, but her spirit still shined. In that small village, she was known not for her age, but for a kindness that never faded. Lucia left no inheritance of wealth, but she left behind stories, life values, and warm memories for many hearts. She lived simply, but meaningfully. Night fell. Lucia smiled in peace, slowly closing her eyes, like a leaf falling without a sound. The world might forget her name, but it would never forget the love she gave. If Lucia's story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Viorna. Your small support means the world to us and helps us bring more meaningful stories to life.